YouTube, hi, my name is Mark and this is Nixon Motorsports. This channel is all about motorsports, from racing to exotic cars and occasionally simulators. Today's video, we're going to get into tire temperatures, what we've learned over this last season in addressing tire temps, how to get the tires into their optimal window for performance and so on. Fair amount of detail to get into, so come on, let's get going. So if you've been watching us this year, we had a big focus on trying to maximize our tire performance. And if you think about that, you know, tires for race cars can provide a significant advantage performance-wise for your race car. And determining or making sure that your tires are operating to their peak is a big deal, and so that was a focus this year. If you've seen some of the previous videos on this channel, you know, we showed and talked and dragged you along with all these different things that we've been doing. So let me talk just for a second about race car tires themselves, and you'll hear tire manufacturers talk about the tire temperature windows frequently, right? Now, they're talking about the carcass temperature, just to be clear. So that's the inner core of the tire. And the reason tire temperatures are so important, this is what contributes to the tire's ability for that adhesive, that lateral grip that you'll need in a road racing car itself. And if your tires are too cold, as an example, it's called graining, and too cold, they underperform. The rubber physically just starts to peel off the tire. It's not ideal, right? And on the opposite side of that, if the tire is too hot, the tire will start to blister. Similar type of feel, you know, people can refer to that as the tire feels greasy, but ultimately from a performance point of view, the tires are not in their proper temperature for that reason. So getting the tire temperature data, you're going to have to get that from the tire manufacturer. These are typically not just laying around. They don't like to share that for some reason, but it depends on the tire construction, the compounds, and so on. So you need to get that from your tire manufacturer. And there are two things. So I run Avon's exclusively, if I can talk, and I've been able to obtain two different tire windows. So from Avon. So the first is the operating window, and the operating window is simply the minimum and the maximum limits of the tire's temperature to perform. So not graining, not blistering, and so on, okay? The second window is really the optimal or peak temperature window for the tire. And this is a more narrow window, but that is where the tires will perform at their absolute best. So understanding both of those is important, and how to achieve that now is the bigger discussion. So if you saw some of the videos this year, again, a lot of work on tire itself, playing with different tire geometries, you know, width specifically, different compounds, and so on. And you know, we were experiencing on some of the wider tires, again, Avon's, we were experiencing some graining issues and so on. So a lot of focus on understanding the tires themselves, the temperatures themselves. And if we go back and think about, well, how have we been doing this over the years? You know, pretty straightforward, right? Most racers have become accustomed to when the car comes in from a session, you will visually look at your tires, do a visual inspection. You get a sense, and you can see kind of the wear pattern, what the tire physically looks like. Immediately off track, you would do tire pressure tests. So you would measure your tire pressures, the hot side of that, and you would use a device, a temperature device called a tire barometer, which basically is a needle you stick into the tire that penetrates the upper surface of the tire to measure the carcass temperature. And you know, while both of those are value, in fact all three, right, visual, tire pressure, and barometer, they are after the run, and tires do change and cool surprisingly quick. And so my approach this year was, outside of using you know, the old ways, so to speak, is to collect more data, let data help learn from an understanding point of view, and using that to basically back into how do we achieve the maximum tire performance for the race car. Does that make sense? So, you know, when you think about tires and getting the tires to perform in their absolute maximum, right? Think of, and there are so many parameters or variables that can influence that. So just kind of off the top of my head here, you know, in your comments, you know, please share if you can think of a few other parameters I missed. I'm sure there's some. But the first one that comes to mind is, you know, the corner weight. So the vertical load on each tire definitely is going to be a contributor to the tire performance, ultimately in generating heat into the tire itself, right? So the tires for heat do need energy into the tire for the tire to actually increase its tire pressures and to ultimately rise its temperatures. But anyway, so vertical load is a big one. Tied to that, and the next item that comes to mind is total downforce. So the more downforce you can crank into your car, you'll increase your vertical load. You'll allow the tire to actually perform better, increasing lateral loads, which increases temperature in the tires. So downforce is a big one. Think about some suspension items that come to mind. So camber will definitely affect your tire temperature, and camber for road racers, right? You normally want negative camber in your each corner, basically. As your chassis rolls, you'll need the camber negative to correct itself in your corner in the load side, so your tire is square, so it's flat with the racetrack. That's what that is, and that's a direct relationship, of course, to injecting more energy and then temperature in your tires. So camber, toe, another one, right? So typically on race cars, road racers, you'll have negative toe on the front of your vehicle a little bit, and then you'll have a little bit of toe in on your rear, just to keep your rear stable. Regardless of the in and out, if you just think about it, toe actually injects slip into the tire, and so that will, of course, create more energy, which is more heat. So toe is one. Let's see, the next one that comes to mind is rake. So the car rake does make a difference. Now that's shifting load from one side of the car to the other. So back to the corner weight conversation. Center of gravity, again, I mentioned rake and moving load. Well, center of gravity is a big deal as well. Every car has a center of gravity. the lower the center of the gravity is to the ground, you know, the more mass closer to the ground, ultimately that mass of the vehicle and how it moves under braking, cornering, and so on, you know, will affect tire temperature. So center of gravity, or CG. Let's see, a couple other thoughts that come to mind. Ambient temperature, the hotter or colder air temperature, of course, will have an influence. Track surface temperature will have an influence on tire temperature. Actually, the track texture, so how smooth or how coarse the physical surface is of the track, will have an effect. Altitude. So the higher the altitude, the air is thinner, the less downforce you have, and so altitude definitely will make a difference. Let's see, spring rates. So spring rate definitely will have an influence on tire temperature. So a softer sprung car will have more chassis roll, and surprisingly, a softer spring rate, lower spring rate, will actually reduce the heat in the tires themselves. We've seen that through data, which to me was a little odd. But a heavier spring rate, a stiffer car itself, will actually inject more energy in the tires, more temperature. Let's see, another one that comes to mind, of course, sway bars are going to have an influence on tire temps. Then we think about the tire itself. So, well, the tire size. The wider the tire, you have more tire contact patch on the track. A wider tire requires more energy for the same compound, the same construction tire, and so on, to get to its temperature, right? So a more narrow tire, again, same construction, same everything else for the tire, will actually come up to temperature faster than a wider tire. So keep that in mind. Tire pressure will make a difference. In fact, tire pressures are a fine-tuning tool. You know, I've been told over the years through various race engineers, look, it's just it's not an absolute, but for roughly every 1 psi, if I'm recalling this correctly, for every 1 psi, it's about 40 pounds of spring rate, thereabouts. So you can fine-tune your spring rates simply by, you know, ½ pound, 1 pound tire pressures and so on. And we're talking about the hot tire pressures, right? Let's see, last couple that come to mind. So tire compound will make a difference. The tire construction, tire compound. I know for Avon, as an example, multiple different compounds and construction, of course, but they each themselves have their own temperature windows. So you can run a tire that is going to come in a lot faster than others, simply because the tire's construction itself was designed to operate in different temperature windows, okay? And the last one that comes to mind, you got to add the driver. So look, drivers have something to do with this as well. A driver can either, you know, force more slip angle on the tires. They could be more aggressive. They can inject more energy, more demand on the car, the tires, or not. So a driver's style and input ultimately can add, and all of these things, I'm talking here for quite a while, all of these things have an effect or influence on the tire's temperature. So, what did we learn this year? First, I'll have to say this. data is a valuable tool. So data acquisition, for me at least, man, I couldn't live without it. So again, if you've seen some of the previous videos, you know, we converted the car last year to Motec, and we have data logging and channels, you know, all over the place. So we're logging real time things like track surface temperatures, and anyway, a lot. So what did we learn? Well, some of the assumptions we had, we either proved or disproved some of our ideas and thoughts around chassis tuning differences to try to get the tires into their temperature itself. And we were hell-bent on the idea of running a wider tire versus a slightly narrower set of tires. So basically a 2-inch difference front to rear, you know, from the wide and soft and so on. So 2 inches of tire. And we had a heck of a time trying to get the rear of the car, primarily with the wider tires, same compound, to get up to their temperature. And so of all the variables that I talked about of influence and such around tires, we ran numerous different sessions attempting again to tune out or remove obviously some of the graining we had, but to get the tires into their operating window. So back to, you know, what did we learn this year? We really proved to ourselves that without data, number one, you'd be chasing your tail, right? And looking at tires visually, attempting to do a post-session tire parameter, it helped. I mean, it was close, but we were not quite there. So data, if nothing else, I would say for me was an absolute requirement when you're trying to maximize your tires and to get them into their windows. So let me show you some of what we have on the data side. Again, this is all Motec. You could use obviously AIM, Pi, you know, any of the other systems out there. So some of these worksheets that I have in the Motec system, I'm going to walk through some of that and explain why I have some of this data being collected and how that is beneficial, okay? So let me grab a seat here, and hopefully you can see this okay. So this is i2 Pro, and I have, if I scroll over here, you can see I have multiple different basic views that I can move into, like from drivers, you see I can go down suspension. You know, this is how you can maneuver through i2 software. But let me start here and start with the latest, newest mod that I did. So I've added new IR temperature sensors inside the wheel for the tires, and I'll talk about why here in just a second. But I mean, ultimately, so TPMS sensors provide tire pressures, as you know, and some of the new high-end, very trick ones, and the ones I use, by the way, are from Izze, I-Z-Z-E. They're great, by the way. We're a customer. There's no affiliation, just so you know, for the plug. But using 16-channel TPMS sensors in your wheels actually is understanding and recording real-time data of your tire carcass, the inner temperature of your tire. This is a very valuable thing to have. So I'm looking at this screen here, and again, it's a lot of color. What it's showing you is the top is my left front, here's my right front, my left rear, my right rear tires. And this is just a lap, and it's showing you visually the 16 channels. So if I just look at one for an example here, and it's color, but all the way up there's 16 channels for the width from the innermost side to the outermost side. So you have a very good visual look at the tire and its temperature just visually. That's what this is. And one nice thing about Motec, you know, if you're looking at this over here, so I'm able to pull in all my setup data is all pulled in dynamically. So if I'm looking over here, for an example, I'm showing you cold tire pressures, I'm showing you hot tire pressures, track surface temps, all these sorts of things, the tire size, front and rear, all these things are brought into the display, which is quite cool. So anyway, this is the first worksheet under tire temperatures, the inner side. Now if I go to operating temperature, this one's, I think, pretty cool. So this worksheet, the purpose for this worksheet is first to answer the question of, are the tires at this moment of the track in their window, their operating window, and their prime or optimal window? Yes or no? And so it's showing you the top here is your front end, your front left, front right, and here you have the rear of the car, left and right. And it's just taking an average of all those channels into a single view. That's all that's doing. And then down here in the bottom, it's actually, if you can see this, I actually programmed in the operating window. It's basically a yes or no. Is it in the window and or not, right? And here's the optimal window. So you can see here very quickly, are the tires in their window. And then with histograms here to the right, it's showing me, again, this came up just on a particular lap, right? But it's showing me each corner, each tire, their temperatures and where they're at from an average point of view, okay? So one thing that's kind of neat, and let me just scroll out here a little bit. So if I do this and just scroll forward. So one thing, so what this is showing, it was a short run I think I did, it looks like, what, 6 laps? So in lap, out lap, and then 6 laps. So you can see here, through the 6 laps, you can see the tire temperatures as they build. And my fast lap actually for this particular run was lap 4. And my tires are just in their operating window, but they're not quite in their prime window, right? But if you roll forward, you can see the temperatures continue to increase here into lap 5. And looking at my video on track, I had boarded lap 5 about halfway into the lap. I had some traffic and just aborted the lap. But you can see the tires were taking several laps to get up the temperature, and it wasn't until lap 5 at this particular day that the tires were finally in their prime, or just starting to get in their prime window. So if I continue to look through a few more things, so I have another worksheet. This is tire pressures. If I stand back here, so this is showing for a run, it's showing the tire pressures itself. Okay, pretty standard. Another one I created, I think this is a pretty valuable one. So this is average temperatures. So inside tire, mid, outside, and it's taking the 16 channels and it's just combining them into the inner, mid, outer groupings. And so it's showing you kind of from that view where the temperatures are on each of those sides of the car. So now a little more visual. Now this one I do find kind of cool. So I have work groups like this, worksheets, sorry, that are basically, this is focused on understanding the load side of a tire itself. And let me try to explain. So in this example, I'm looking at my front left only, okay? This is a visual color grouping of tire temperature. Down on the bottom is inside and the top is outside. And if I scroll over here, you can see the actual channels themselves and what their temperature is in Celsius. But the point of this view is at the very top here, if you see this little piece, so this is basically to understand, is the vehicle turning in right or left orientation? And for this purpose, because this is a left front, this is saying the vehicle is turning right. So there's a calculation, a math channel that says when the vehicle has lateral load greater than, I think I used 1G as an example, it creates this yes or no response that the vehicle is turning. So visually what that allows you to do is to look on the loaded side when the car is turning, and you can actually see what the tires are doing themselves. So I kind of find that cool. If you look over here, so I scrolled over to the right rear as an example, and here you see the right rear is working a little harder from a temperature focus. And again, back to when it's turning, I can actually see visually what that looks like. Okay? One more view. Now this is a histogram of each corner, and this is for this particular lap that I'm on, and it's showing you all the channels temperatures from a histogram view. Pretty cool, right? Last one. I have a lot of worksheets here, so I won't bore you to death indefinitely here. But the last one here, so I have 4 different worksheets that's just another view of the tires themselves, temperature, and it's showing you each of the channels, and it's filtered a bit so they're not so noisy, but it's basically showing you the tire envelope, if you will, kind of most inside to most outside of the tire, and it's showing you what that looks like. So that's what that is. So I have a lot of worksheets in Motec. I have 2 tire temperature sensors on the vehicle. I have a 16 channel outside IR tire temp that's attempting to log real time the full width of the tire itself from the outside view, and I started with those, so that's why they're on the vehicle. And then as I've been talking, I have the new pretty cool inside 16 channel IR temp sensors inside the wheel. Those are definitely more accurate. Now the negatives, you need to have those sensors on each wheel, and if you have multiple wheels like most race car drivers do, you're talking about sets for every wheel combination you have. Whereas the outside tire temp sensor, you mount it once, it doesn't matter how many wheels and tire sets you have, you follow me, right? So the outside tire temp is interesting. Now, what I've learned from the outside tire temp, because it changes so radically fast, it's amazing to see how much your tires cool on a straightaway and how their heat builds so quickly on corners. And the outside tire temps actually show you a good view of that. The inside temperature is really the one that you want to understand the optimal window of the tire. But back to the outside temp sensors. They actually show, and I was using them to try to understand camber balance for each of the corners. So back to, adjusting how much camber you have and the tire within each corners on the loaded side, are they flat to the surface and so on. So they do help from that end. So personally, I think both are the way to go. If I was only going to have one set, well, look, the outside IR temp sensors are the more economical approach. And by the way, I used Izzy products for that again. Again, plug for Izzy, but great stuff. If the budget's not the challenge, and it's either one or the other, I would say go with the inside temp sensors, because your learnings, I think, are much more valuable than not. So that's my recommendation. You know, so as I talked a little bit about Motec i2 and how you can feed all your session data into i2, it's actually very easy to do. You basically have an Excel file that you have many columns of data. Whatever you create as columns, you're able to feed that directly into i2. So I use that now exclusively. I have this whole year of no longer using, you know, separate, you know, written documents for managing setups and all the changes you're doing to the vehicle. I use the Excel approach, the loader piece for i2 specifically. And if I just scan over here for a minute, you know, you can see this thing. It's busy, and if I scroll over here to the right, you know, it just keeps going. It keeps going, right? But that is so cool to have all your changes fed into i2 when you're looking. So for an example, like you know, what tires are you using, what set of tires, what were the cold pressures at, you know, you followed me, right? So it's very cool. So I mentioned tire manufacturers need to give you tire temperature data, and again, it's usually not out there just laying around on the internet to find. So I am exclusively using Avons, and have now for the last several years. So I have been able to get that myself, and I'll show you just quickly what that looks like if I pan down here. So here's a screen that I use, and so this section over here is basically a bunch of different tire compounds. Again, you can see the nomenclature. You can see these color bar graphs, if you will. So from cold to green to red to hot and so on. Those are the window temperature windows that you need to use. So I've loaded all of those into my i2 Excel setup piece. So that actually feeds directly into our analysis software, and that's how I'm able to understand are the tire temperatures in their optimal window or not. Make sense? Well, that's really it for this video. A lot of talking. I hope there were some bits of data that are useful for you. If you have any questions, you know, send it over to me in comments. I'll get back to you as quick as I can. That's it for today. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate your support for this channel. And again, if you haven't subscribed, you know, consider doing so. It helps a lot. But that's it. Just for a few news items quickly for you. This winter, I will be doing a motor swap in the car, just maintenance, a refresh item. But I'll be putting a new floor, new diffuser on the car. So that's going to be coming along here shortly. I have a handful of other exotic car on-track moments where I've taken a few cars out, so I'll do a few videos on that coming along as well. And I think a cool one that you'll probably, I think some of you will like, is I will be having a video segment coming out on strain gauges, you know, the load cells for the race car, and talking about that, showing the install and such. So that will be coming out as well. That's it for now. Again, like always, thank you. Take care. Ciao.